you know how to do it. Yeah.
Well, I'll do my best. Thank you so much for everything, for hosting this and for having me. This is my third cohort here talking about metaverse architecture. So I'm super excited. It's always a fun discussion. And yeah, typically what I've done in the past and what we'll do this time, this class in particular will be more of an introduction into what I do as a metaverse architect, but also more broadly into the metaverse as a whole. So we'll talk about that with a handful of slides that I'll start sharing in a moment. And then the next class, which I believe is April 6th, will
Yes.
be yeah, and thank you guys for working with me on that time. And but yeah, that'll be a walkthrough of different metaverse apps and different worlds that we can all travel through together. And that's usually a really fun way to kind of bounce between applications, different builds, different experiences, and really get kind of a first person view of what's being built now and what was built in the past. So I think that'll, between the two, this is a little bit more of a slideshow, and the next one is a field trip. But we can get started. Let me share my screen, see if this works. I always see. All right. So let me see. What can you guys see me okay? If anyone can give me a shout.
Yes.
Excellent. So we see the slides. Cool.
Hmm.
All right. Okay, excellent. So this, I'll walk through a handful of different examples of my work in the first set here, and then we'll get into the metaverse itself. But hi, everyone. My name is Kirk Finkel, or Untitled XYZ, and I'm a metaverse architect and an architect by background. So this will kind of be a bit of a timeline in the beginning here to kind of walk you through how I stumbled into this world to begin with. Yeah, so let's start with the hello blockchain phase of things, which I'm sure you guys have heard so many different stories about how folks first get into this scene. But I think these stories are pretty important because they really illustrate how a disruptive technology or disruptive world can really latch on to so many different types of disciplines, whether you're creative or an engineer or a anyone really. So this whole blockchain environment has been a really disruptive infrastructure that has attracted people at all different phases, and I love hearing these kinds of stories. But for myself, in the beginning, I should say, I was a practicing architect and urban designer in New York City, and a lot of my work had to do with public planning and campus master plans, looking at urban master plans and public spaces. So a lot of my work had to deal with looking at community workshops with town halls and getting feedback from the public to inform the design decisions an architect would make. And that was a really important part, I believe, a really important part of the discipline of architecture, is to make sure that you get the right stakeholders involved in the design process. And so all the while doing this, I was leading a handful of different workshops at my architecture firm, looking at how we could use new technology to maybe make the process of getting ideas from the public more embedded in what we do and more accurate. It's always about how do we get the pulse of what people are thinking in a city to really design a public setting like a public square or a streetscape or a new housing complex. How do we design those things so that they're more involved with the people that actually live there? So in 2016, I stumbled into a blockchain project called Steam. And so this was my first real entry point into the blockchain world, where Steam was kind of a forum for how people could basically communicate with one another with comments and blog posts, and use those to earn cryptocurrency. So instead of likes and hearts, there was a kind of social currency that was shared called Steam. And it was an interesting project, and I thought it could be an interesting way of looking at kind of a new town hall model where you could really have stakeholders and reward them for innovative feedback and ideas. Um, so that's a long way of saying my first project in the blockchain space was a project called Steamtown, just as kind of a prototype, thinking about this coming from an architecture firm. I was curious about how to gather feedback from the public and learn more about them. So what I did was, this is a screen grab from it. I asked the public about places in their hometown that were important to them, or different buildings they that inspired them, as you can see here. And then what I did was I started modeling these different buildings off of the comments in on Steam when I would ask people for different buildings. And so, some people would say a church that was important to them. Some people would say a birdhouse. Others would say a stepwell. Others would say, a civic building, or, an igloo. So it was a wide range, and I really like the idea of kind of collaging them together to build these fictional worlds that were kind of a visualization or a representative of this community of followers that I was learning from and exploring from during my time with learning about Steam. And that quickly kind of evolved into, you can see here a lot of different kind of repeated building parts like windows and stairs. And so very quickly that turned into a series of other experiments looking at modular building, so I could kind of collage a visual language together off of the comments that people would share with me. So when people would say, I want, a building that inspires me from my hometown is this building, I would kind of collage that together using a similar language. So this is another experiment. Steamtown kind of became Blocktown. So this is in 2016 to 2017 and 18 and beyond. I started doing more of these kind of visualization experiments, and also playing with, QR codes here as kind of a way to have a master plan or a city plan. I was curious about that. And so, that really was kind of the launching point for me, the launching pad to think about art as a way of exploring this kind of community language of blockchain. And to me, it was very much about how that forum, how these different kind of vignettes and motifs of windows and doors and staircases could then be kind of collaged in these sort of fictional environments that are very much community-led or community-forward. So that really got me thinking about how these could look more as experiences. This is a series of artworks that I started to do that collage these building parts together. Here's a project Machine for Living, which was one of the first artworks I published on Super Rare. And these get more elaborate. I was thinking about how these could kind of inform one another at a larger scale, at different scales, as collaborations. The one to the left, Artifacts of It, is a collaboration with an architect and artist, Thedo, who I met early on. And I just love the kind of collaborative element of crypto art as a whole. Even before the metaverse was really mature, it was a lot about artists learning from one another, kind of sharing their own language, their aesthetic, their kind of ideas. So crypto art to me was extremely exciting because of that. There was this incredible amount of idea sharing that was happening. And so, these projects more recently have gotten more larger scale, thinking about how these fictional cities could be created. And this very much informs my architecture work that I do today. I use art as this kind of way to explore these topics of the metaverse. And this artwork in particular is called Monument of Errors. It's largely about the premise of if a column, a traditional column, didn't have to serve a structural purpose, what would it serve? If it didn't have to support a floor and a roof, what would it ultimately do? And I think then it becomes this more playful aesthetic of a column kind of searching for a starting point and an end point. And to me, why the metaverse is so exciting is that we can really reinvent all of the traditional norms of architecture, where you don't have function in the same way you do in a building. So is it really a building anymore, or is it more of a collage of these kind of architectural artifacts that then means something else in a new setting? Um, so my artwork now is really, I use this as almost a sketchbook for buildings that I work on in the metaverse, which have the kind of semblance of a building, use features of a building, but are collaged or created in a way that maybe don't look like a building at all. Um, so this is more recent work in progress. But so the artwork itself really led me into the rabbit hole of the metaverse as a whole. And for me, the metaverse was this kind of what I was hoping the blockchain world would lead to be honest, from the early days of looking at, Steam as kind of a town hall experience, getting feedback from people. What would that look like visually as an environment? And so um, it's really exciting to see how this has taken shape over the last few years, and really incredible to see all of these different worlds that have formed. And just before we get into this, and you probably know this already, but just to reemphasize, the word metaverse actually came from 1992 through a novel by Neil Stevenson called Snow Crash. And most people think it came from Facebook, but it did not. It was long before Facebook. And there's lots to be learned from the novel itself and how the world it's building towards. There's a lot of debate of, is this utopia? Is this dystopia? And we can certainly talk about that later. I love that topic of what this is actually going towards. But the term itself has been around for a while, and it's just more recently really latched on. Um, and as you know, many of you are already familiar with the different kind of virtual worlds that are utilizing blockchain to tap into this metaverse experience. This is Somnium space. Every world has its own kind of beautiful aesthetic, its own style, its own building technique, its limitations, everything. And I think that's a really beautiful part of where we are in this phase of the metaverse. Everything is, incredibly different, and I think that's a strength, that all of these different apps that we use to explore together look very different, act very different, and provide very different tools for building. You can see right here, these are, you wouldn't even think necessarily that that building, the dots in the different in the distance here are buildings, but they are. They're an environment that you can experience together. So this is the incubator of crypto art district, IOCA. And this was one of the first times that I went into VR in Somnium space, and it's pretty wild. This is an earlier experience I had in crypto voxels. This is Pranksy Land. I think maybe 2 years ago now, maybe three? No, 2 years, I think. Pranksy Land was a really, for me, a pretty monumental kind of moment in the metaverse history, the early metaverse history, where Pranksy, who you guys might know as an influencer in the NFT space, had a lot of different plots of land that was given to different artists, crypto artists, who created a series of incredible different builds. And there was this kind of Pranksy Land, almost extravaganza of exploring these different things together. And, a ton of people showed up. It was really amazing. It was, for me, a really great way to get introduced to different worlds and different builds. And this particular scene was created by Fabien Rashid, who I think might have spoken um, earlier in the cohort. But yeah, I think CryptoVoxels is obviously such a different aesthetic. It's such a different style. It's a lot more raw, in my opinion. It's created out of voxels, out of these 3D cubes, and I think that changes the kind of like environment that you can create. And the style that we communicate with one another. And I really love how different the kind of high resolution version is versus the low resolution. I think they're both equally beautiful. Decentraland, of course, is kind of a different aesthetic as well. It's this sort of low poly environment that puts a strong emphasis on its avatars and their kind of look and feel and their emotes and how they interact with one another. And in Decentraland, it just has this very kind of vibrant, colorful aesthetic that feels very much like a game. And so I think these different worlds really attract different kind of applications, whether it is a game itself, an art gallery, or kind of a meetup. There are lots of different things that each world, I think, attracts to one another. And of course, beyond this, there's Sandbox as well. That's kind of the big four, but there's also, these other metaverse applications like Mona, which is this really beautiful web-based environment that you can create with incredible lighting, really stunning. Similar with Arium, who I know you're going to be speaking with if you haven't already. Arium creates these really incredible, diverse worlds that I know VCA has used for a lot of exhibitions, and they're truly stunning. There's an incredible amount of variation you can create. So this is a project we did last summer called Hack of a Bear with Christie's and Hackatow. So Hackatow created this beautiful, incredible bear sculpture that we then created kind of a bear cave for. So this is a pseudo pantheon project that we did in Arium. And yeah, so there are all these different virtual apps, and there's many different kind of things that I think we could call a metaverse. This is a project called VR Museum by Secondary Bounce and Boltron. This is a project that came out recently. It's very VR focused. And this is one of my artworks reinterpreted as a sculptural piece that you can walk inside of. For me, this is just these different apps provide totally different experiences, but it is kind of a way of collectively exploring the same thing and having a meeting place, having a shared experience. I think ultimately that's what the metaverse largely is this kind of shared experience and environment that pushes from 2D into 3D and beyond. So actually, back to that point, many people will define the metaverse in totally different ways. It largely depends on what they do, what their medium is, and what applications they like to use. And so I think it's almost impossible for us to define exactly what the metaverse is at this moment, because it's really a living, breathing thing that is emerging right now. And so to me, the metaverse is really an umbrella term that encompasses many different virtual worlds. I think everyone will tell you something different, and that's perfectly fine. I think it's far too early for us to know. But by and large, it certainly is the next phase of the internet. To me, this is something that is pushing us past the website into the web world. And I think that is ultimately what this world is, what this verse is taking us into. And as the technology grows and enhances over the next decade or so, this will be, this term might become what we define it as. Instead of the internet, we'll call it metaverse. Who knows? Another term could come out next week that's more compelling. But for whatever reason, this has become incredibly catchy and has really stuck. So back to architecture itself, I think a big question right now is, what is metaverse architecture? If we're building in a virtual world, are these buildings? Can we call them buildings? And I think for me as an architect, this has always been an existential question, is are we building things that can be defined as buildings? And I'm not so sure that they really can be, because they don't serve the same purpose of shelter and structural support and many of the things that in real life architecture serve for us. I'm obviously in a Brooklyn apartment right now as I give this lecture. My apartment and the building it's in serve a very specific shelter purpose for me. But of course, when I put my goggles on and dive into Somnium space, it's a different experience, and it provides a different kind of environment for me to explore. Um, so I think the metaverse provides a very different medium for architecture to be expressed. For those who don't know, I'm the resident architect at the Museum of Crypto Art, who I believe you had a talk with a couple weeks ago. So at MoCA, we love to explore this question of what is architecture if it's made virtual? What does this ultimately mean for a building? What does this mean for an experience around art? I think that's a really exciting question right now that all of us collectively get to explore and decide. So this is me during the construction of the MoCA Museum and us kind of exploring what this space could be. Obviously, this is a museum without walls. There's no roofs. There's hardly any floor. And art is not hung on a wall with a nail or glue or anything. It's really floating on air. And that's the kind of medium we decided to embrace for this building. Um, Obviously, in a virtual world, you don't have to abide by gravity. You aren't restricted by the elements or physics to kind of create these environments. So ultimately, what you create can be very different, can look a lot different, and can serve different purposes. Um, but to me, for this project, what we were trying to do is take this kind of language of a QR code and break it down into kind of a 3D environment that you could inhabit. So you'll see if you haven't already explored, which we'll do in about a couple weeks, we'll go to the museum and we can look at this kind of 3D QR code that's here. But this is MoCA now in Somnium space. And this is in the VR app where it's just this incredibly beautiful, well-lit environment that really lets architecture shine in a different way. But the artwork itself is kind of floating in between these voids. There are these different pockets that you can explore. And I think it makes for a different kind of experience that's much more social, much more curious. You can explore these different kind of pockets of the museum in different ways. All the while, the nature itself and the setting itself is kind of drawn into the building and is very much a part of it. So, it's right on the waterfront, so to speak. There's a mountain in the distance, but I think what we have an opportunity to explore with metaverse architecture is an entirely different setting and context for art, digital art to thrive. And I think the possibilities are really limitless when you look at an artwork and you try to provide a different context for it that isn't a traditional building. There are lots of amazing experiences you can create that separate art and create different spaces, but also provide a spotlight for it that's designed and beautiful and can be really fun. So this is I think one of the fins that kind of comes out here, and I highly recommend sunsets in Somnium space. It's very, very cool. And so back to kind of like the beginning for me, all of this really comes back to public spaces and public environments where people can meet, connect, learn from one another. And I think that's what the metaverse is best for. What we wanted with MoCA was to create a public setting where people could meet and discuss art, explore art together, and learn from one another. And so that's why you have this kind of opening here where the structure kind of creates almost a cave or a shelter in its own way, where you can connect with other people and learn from one another. And it's very much spontaneous. It's very open. But it's been incredible seeing and meeting other people in this building who are there to explore digital art and learn about digital art. and have these different kind of artist talks, which we frequently have at the museum. And it's just a very surreal experience because in a lot of ways the building itself is a public space. And there are other buildings that we worked on for more solo exhibits. This is also the Hack of a Bear installation in Somnium space in a kind of pseudo pantheon that I created that plays a little bit with gravity or lack thereof, and uses these coffers as kind of a pattern design that then shelter the bear itself. So there are lots of fun things that you can create in these worlds and really embracing the environment it's surrounded by. Here are just a couple other snapshots as well of different buildings. I really am obsessed with the kind of clouds and the look and feel of Somnium. I think it provides a beautiful environment to build. This is a gallery or an exhibition space that we're working on currently, where these areas kind of lead you through different artworks, and the path itself is the artwork. And this is, McCall was here. This was an exhibit about generative art that happened last year, and on a staircase project that one of the first projects I did in the metaverse, actually, where the stair leads you up and around different artworks. But it was so surreal and so cool to see everyone kind of climbing this thing, and hearing one another's, all these artists speaking about their works, hearing different curators kind of talk about what the art means and has meant to kind of the growth of generative art as a whole. And these spaces are just feel like these kind of new environments to really connect with one another. And for an architect, I think that's incredibly exciting, that you can activate a space so quickly, create these worlds, create these builds, and have them open to the public almost immediately. So, the Web 2 world, I think, is becoming the Web 3D world, where the metaverse itself, to me, is a new kind of public realm. It doesn't serve the same purpose as in real life building, but I do think it creates a new type of public space where we can learn from one another, connect with one another, and discuss any kind of idea, from a very non-serious discussion that's just a meetup, to very serious discussions about the future of art, the future of our in real life world, where we can gather kind of feedback and topics from people all over the globe simultaneously. I think that's a really powerful, almost underestimated aspect of what this is building. If we can have a collective hive mind of all these people around the globe, like you here, you're all from different parts of the globe in this residency. I think that's a really powerful level of knowledge sharing that hasn't been able to exist this way before. And so to me, this new public realm is an incredible opportunity for us to explore a new kind of global dialogue together. And I'll end with a couple images here. This is a snap I took from a couple years ago in Crypto Voxels, where there was a George Floyd march, where people would kind of renovate their voxels with Justice for Floyd graffiti, and you can see a little bit in the lower right there that there were people marching forward along this stretch of road. And earlier in that day, I was at a real protest in Brooklyn, and then went online to participate in this protest. And I think that's for me, that was a really powerful moment where people who are around the globe experiencing similar injustices or issues or different things that they want to kind of collectively bond over. I think the metaverse provides an incredible new forum and experience for these things to happen. And it was really powerful, I think, to hear from different social justice advocates and different people who have had their own experiences that they want to share in this environment. I think having this kind of outlet is really powerful. and I don't think it's reported on very much in the kind of context of what the metaverse gets reported on. You're always hearing about how much a plot of land is sold for, but I wish the discussion was more about the implications of what it is to have this collective and shared moment of protest together, or moment of learning collectively. I think that's where the real metaverse will shine through. And in past talks, I've always bring up this super studio image. This is from 1971, also during a similar kind of like phase of history of protest, of re-understanding, a new understanding of what technology means for society and for culture and for humans, for people. This is a project by an architecture collective called Super Studio, and the project itself was called the Continuous Monument. To me, the metaverse is this continuous monument. It's this kind of stretch where it is an artifact that connects all of us. It's a shared experience where we can empathize with one another in a new way. And I think this was very much a beautiful architectural project back in the 70s that looked at that kind of, shared humanity and what that looks like. There are these beautiful collages from that time in history, and highly recommend everyone to look at Super Studio and Archigram and all these incredible architecture collectives back then, because I think what they were experiencing then resonates today. It's very similar to me, and I think will look and feel more similar as time goes on. But this is a fun image here that I really like. And I think looking ahead, just the final slide here, and then we can open it up for discussion. We are working on this project called Rooms. And this project is very much about a bridge between architectural environments that can exist across different virtual worlds at the same time. So for us, this is kind of creating a new sort of land agnostic architecture that can exist and migrate across virtual worlds. I know we have Anubis here, who has been a metaverse traveler, who has helped us kind of explore these different worlds and really talk about them and experience them in different ways as we're building them. So this is really a lot of what I'm working on right now, is using art to kind of explore these topics, but then building across as many worlds as possible to really figure out how do we create a single building that can then exist across all of these different environments. So Rooms are NFTs that will be launched later this summer. And we'll also be creating a kind of framework for designers to contribute room designs of their own, which will open up to all of you as well later this year. And I think this will be an exciting new way to kind of serve as a bridge where the NFT itself can exist in lots of different environments. So I believe that's all my slides here, which I wanted to keep it to around 30 minutes or so then we can open it up for questions and hear from you all, because you guys are the builders. But yeah, so if anyone has any questions, I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome, Kirk. I think it
Yeah.
would be really nice to hear something about Anubis' point of view of his metaverse, if of course if he wants to. I don't know. Since he's here, Anubis, what if you want?
Yeah, no, I already sent a message to Untitled in the DMs one time. I was like, yo, I wish I could see your works. Well, we can. That's the cool thing about the metaverse, right? Is I remember in university learning about what a megalithic structure is, right? And how, the pyramids and like Stonehenge and all these sort of structures that, societies and civilizations, let's just call them societies and nations before us, like managed to build just through like sheer manpower, right? And then how we sort of stop that. And if you look at how architecture has just changed, architecture has gone like into this very weird route, if you look at it now, at least in like cities and stuff. And then in the metaverse, you have the ability to just like do what's unachievable, like in terms of if it's a megalithic structure or even if it's like an upside down structure or something that isn't bound with the reality completely. And it's like seeing the rooms that were designed by Untitled, like the what is it, um the bear one, with the is it it's not with Hekat, I forget it. I'm not gonna miss
Oh,
I'm gonna miss sorry.
Akatao, you mean
Yeah,
there?
that's the one. Hakata. I've been mispronouncing his name for like 2 years now, completely in the space. But seeing like what was done with that, right, is it's like the metaverse, especially with VR, has the ability to legitimately take you and like put you in the space fully, and then to experience a space where there is no bounds of gravity, right? And especially in the VR world they use, like if you put out your hands you can fly, and so it's like it's actually pretty fun. um it's very eye-opening, because then it's like all the stuff that you would imagine and that you would see in certain movies is sort of achievable, and then 10 times more. I mean, like Untitled, you should talk about your forms, like, or you I know you talked about it a little bit, but like you should showcase what like what's been built with them, because it's like the way those functions is fucking insane.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Anubis. Yeah, totally. At Forms Project, we're actually going to do a little bit of a tour for that in a couple weeks, and so we'll do a lot into Forms. But yeah, uh, Forms were basically like a modular project where the collectible itself can be a staircase, a door, a window, and you can kind of collage them together to create your own buildings in Decentraland. Um, and yeah, I think like the VR headset for me, that was a real gateway for me to kind of learn more about what the potential here is. It's incredibly immersive to have that experience. I think unfortunately, it's still a huge gatekeeping aspect of this, where it's expensive. And a lot of this stuff is expensive. Still, it's a lot cheaper than it was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. But the hope is that the barrier for this breaks down over time, and then we have a much more kind of democratized environment for people to connect and to build in. But yeah, my hope is, it's no secret that I'm sort of disenfranchised with, or just disenchanted with modern architecture. And working in a firm in New York, I got a little tired of kind of the glass skyscraper look and feel. And Anubis and I talk a lot about kind of, old world craft and these kind of incredible, old masonry sort of buildings and monuments that just had a different kind of craft associated with them. And I think with the metaverse, we can really sort of embrace a new mode of craft and building that is digital, but is no doubt artful and not restricted by the same kind of cost of material. You can really create beautiful things uh, with polygon count instead of different kind of budgets, I guess. And I should say too, I have to shout out to Patricia, who we went to architecture school together. she It's just awesome. I'm so excited to see architects like diving into this, and yeah, it's just good. So I had to call you out there.
Hey Kirk, I'll say hi. Hi. I've actually really appreciated hearing your talk, because I didn't know about the Steam project as well. So it was really cool to see kind of the progress of how the how this kind of like participatory design has been evolving. And I think it's really interesting that you're finding ways to co-design with community through the metaverse. I'm curious to hear from you what your thoughts are in terms of, I'm personally really interested in the political, and so I'm interested to hear. Sorry about the background noise, but I'm interested to hear where do you see the future of the metaverse? Like, if these metaverse spaces are built, by large corporations, or if the world's become sort of monopolized by certain companies, how do you see the state of decentralization and building in a decentralized world in the future? So I guess it's a little bit of an open question, but yeah, just curious to hear your thoughts on future of metaverse platforms, but also like how to thinking about really ways to keep the process decentralized and these spaces decentralized. And just yeah, thank you for your talk. It's been really cool to hear.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's an incredible question. Really important. And yeah, for me, my Steam days were really kind of figuring out how this tech could be used to connect with a maybe broader audience in of a low impact way. And I think that, yeah, that still very much resonates today, where I think, the blockchain is a big forum. It's a big kind of conversation piece. Certainly has economic elements, it has spatial elements now. But I think there's a risk with that to what you're saying about the kind of corporate side and certainly the greed side of all of this. I think what I've generally said more recently is that the metaverse, I think, will split in two parts. There's going to be the Web 2 sort of corporate metaverse, and then I hope what will be the Web 3 grassroots metaverse. And I think we're already seeing symptoms of that, where there's these, there are acquisitions, there's Facebook launching their new name. I mean, that is a massive change from how this space was thought of a couple of years ago. And it's very scary to me, because I do think that a lot of the Facebooks and the kind of corporate edge to this, they see users as commodities. They see them as kind of a way to mine or extract data or information, to advertise to them. And I think there will be a very, probably good looking metaverse or interesting experience that you can have there, but that will be really using you to sell you something or sell you. And I think what's really critical now is creating better open standards for builders to create, for developers to create new tools, for metaverses to expand through their communities and by way of their communities, so that it's not under kind of a central umbrella. And that's going to be extraordinarily critical as this space grows and as kind of we all mature through this environment, because Facebook and these other kind of companies that are coming in, they will and probably can just, they're going to make a fortune from this if they have a breakthrough app or a breakthrough kind of experience that pulls people in. So yeah, generally I think it's really, really critical that these niches that we have of, not extraordinarily popular virtual worlds, I hope that they will continue to grow and get better and more open in how they're developed. I think that's pretty critical. And so if we stay to the kind of virtues or tools of the blockchain itself, this kind of open source framework for creating new things, then I think it'll continue to grow in a good direction. But I do see a split happening, and I think we'll continue to have that kind of utopia dystopia sort of vibe as we go forward. But I think that's important too, though, because honestly, a lot of the dystopia will inform the utopia. So, and back and forth. So I think we need both to appreciate the other or critique the other. And I don't believe there will be one kind of comprehensive metaverse app that just sort of consumes all of us, because the technology, there's so much that is open now and accessible. And it's pretty incredible that with a cryptocurrency, you can create your own token, you can create your own economy, and bootstrap through NFTs an environment that you can build and explore. So we'll see lots of variations of this over time, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I was just thinking that, it's funny because in the real, I guess, physical world, there's all these open source construction methods. And so it seems like open source, generally making the process of architecture design as an open source process in the metaverse will be really interesting to kind of democratize, not just make it about architects building, but but making the design itself available for everyone, or the design process available for everyone, which is, it sounds like sort of that's the direction which you're going, which is very cool. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that's really important. That last part is like having the tools available for the public to be able to build and have access to lots of different kind of environments and different like uh, we're there's a discussion I think about virtual land and its value, which I think this comes back to for me, um, where there's scarcity in the metaverse, which we talk about this a lot at Mocha, which I think is a ridiculous concept, like that virtual land has to be scarce. I think it has to be free. And it should be. Like it shouldn't cost $20,000 for a plot of land. That's madness. And I think it wasn't. It used to cost like, $50, $100 or something like that. So I think we're getting to a point now where there are so many virtual world applications that fit under this metaverse. They're each going to have their own mechanics. They're each going to have their own virtual world kind of rules. I hope in some of them or many of them in the future that land is free, because then I think we empower builders to create and to have a safe space to have discussions and build things. It really has to be open for us to fight with the kind of, have this struggle, this existential battle with the corporations that will probably carve out a big share of this. But yeah, I think also to this point, Patsy, is like, you, there's, I lost my train of thought. Just thinking about virtual land here. I lost my train of thought, but I just think like we have to. Oh, what I was going to say was we need to design totally differently if we want that to work. I think we're still using scarcity models that reflect real world stuff. Like if you have a city and you have so many plots of land in a city that's within a city's borders, that's scarcity by municipality, by zoning, by all these different legal constraints. We're still using those rules in much of the metaverse, which I think is silly. Like we should not be creating kind of these valuable or value by scarcity in the same way that we do in the real world. I hope that metaverses begin to play with new rules that look at like maybe land by activity, or by builder activity, by meetup activity, and maybe the town center, the spawn point for a virtual world is defined not by who bought close to center, but who's most active. And the city itself, maybe the parcels migrate to the outside if they're inactive or people are flipping it for value. So I think there are different ways that I hope virtual worlds play with new rules and create an environment that isn't kind of mirroring what we already have in the real world. I think we're still in the early days of seeing people recreate what they already know.
I I actually I wanted to ask a quick question because it comes back to sort of like how the metaverse changes things, and like for me personally, like my dad has always been a fan of like architects, and so like look, for example, like looking at artists, right, who have had um a sort of degree in architecture or have worked in architecture, like Zdzislaw Bikinski, for example, they're able to utilize, their architectural drawings and such in and that aided them in their artistic process to create like their more, you know, creative works, right? And so like how has the metaverse changed the ability for you to like visualize and create these works? Because I don't imagine like you're still sitting um there, doing architectural drawings with a pencil anymore, or even has like you working in VR, has that changed how you do architectural drawings in pencil? Because I'm really curious about that as well.
That's an awesome question. Yeah, I guess first I should say too that I think architecture in the metaverse should be practiced by not just architects. Like, I think that's a problem in the real world with architecture, that it's a bit elitist in how it's practiced. And I do think that in the virtual world, we have an opportunity for architecture to be created by gamers, by artists, by sculptors, by hackers, by developers, engineers, everything. And I think then we can come up with a much richer kind of language for spaces. And so, like, for me, back to the question, I think it's pretty surreal not having, I have a sketchbook where I'll, draw an idea, but it is very weird to then you're putting on a headset in Somnium space and you have to visit it. Like, you go there and you kind of measure it and you bump into walls to make sure that you have the collider objects placed appropriately. And because in most of these worlds, you have to create or define a mesh that is a visual mesh and then a collider mesh. And so that you make sure that the collider aligns well with the visual mesh. And so that the collider just means that your avatar can't go through it. And that's pretty important for things like stairs and walls and floors. Otherwise, you'll just fly right through into infinity. So it's like, it's pretty surreal. I did the other, a couple months ago, I was measuring like a handrail in a gallery, like to making sure it was at hip level. And I was like, man, this feels a lot like actual architecture right now, because I'm doing a site visit with a client and we're looking at handrails. And I was like, oh no, I don't want to do that. But it was pretty funny because it was like, I kept falling off the roof. And that's a problem even in the metaverse, because then you end up at the bottom and it takes like 10 minutes to get back up to the top. So there are some things that transfer through in a weird way. But yeah, I think generally, back to kind of who's doing this, I really think I'm learning a ton from working with different people on builds. Speaking with Hackatow about the kind of metaverse cave that we wanted to build in the Pantheon and what that could be, how that references Italian architecture, and his work that was a collaboration with Leonardo da Vinci drawing. Like, all of those things, you learn so much in the process of getting exposed to other creatives. And I don't think real world architecture does that enough. I wish it did, but I think it's too constrained in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think virtual architecture offers a totally different kind of environment, and it's very exciting.
Hey, hi, I'm Tyro. I'm Isma. I wanted to ask you, like, I'm also an architect. I study architecture, although I'm not working as an architect, but I did. So I was curious, like, how did you make the shift into real architecture to like this kind of virtual? Like, you were looking for it, or it was like a chance that just appeared to you, or how did it happen?
Ismaelio, awesome to meet another architect. Yeah, it's been a crazy ride. I left my architecture job in 2017. This was during a time where I think I left a little too early in some respects, because the metaverse wasn't really there yet. I was hoping it would be available. I figured that this would be disruptive for creatives, but even then, NFTs weren't out yet. And so it's been, at the time, I was just a little bit frustrated with I was an urban designer in New York, and we were doing these public spaces, and it just was frustrating to not have a deeper connection with the communities that we were serving, that they weren't an integral part of the design process. And I think the stakeholders we were working with, largely for a public realm project, are in many cases investors. They're the municipality, and in that case, it can largely be a government official who wants to push a certain project forward that aligns with their election cycle. And I think that's very interesting in some respects, that architecture can be so political. But I do think it can also make it very corrupted in a lot of ways, and not for the people that it's ultimately designed to serve. Um, so at the time, I took a huge risk, which was, I didn't have a real business lined up when I left architecture. I was just so excited and interested with what the blockchain world could offer. And so I took a leap, and I actually did a number of projects as through a kind of like startup studio with an architecture friend of mine. And we did a ton of work of different kind of ideas of what the blockchain could offer architecture, but it was very early in a lot of respects. There wasn't a lot you could do back then. So now I just continuously have taught myself new tools of how to model, of how to build in these different worlds. And it's been a lot of trial and error. Like, it certainly still is. It's just like a lot of testing out new things and bouncing between art and architecture to kind of create a business or create a sustainable profession. And so it's been kind of a wild ride. I was really like, for a couple years, I wasn't making a living at all, and it was very difficult to convince people to want to explore this. And now I think the tools are there, and it's changed a lot. There are many more kind of frameworks to support artists, like VCA, for example, and different DAOs to kind of support architecture, different institutions like MoCA to support the arts. And I think there's just many, many more tools now or frameworks to support creatives of all kinds of architecture and art, whatever else. But yeah, it was a wild ride for me. I mean, since leaving my firm in 2017, it was there were a couple of years where it was just lots of I was doing graphic design for a while, and it's just you kind of bounce and then you sort of feel your groove again, and the metaverse kind of gave me a new groove, I guess, so to speak. But yeah, I think for me it's just been so much more rewarding working in this space because you just meet incredible people like you guys, and it's very different when you work in a firm like in New York and you're kind of held to your desk or to your CAD window and design in a very isolated kind of environment.
Yeah, it's actually, yeah, happy for you that you actually found your path, right? Because it shouldn't be easy to just, get out, especially since you started, as you were saying, in 2017. And then I have actually another question. You were talking about different frameworks to do like virtual architecture. I tested a little bit like Decentraland SDKs like a couple of years ago, and I'm actually very interested in generative stuff in general because I specialized myself in generative architecture and then I shifted into generative art. And I'm curious if like is there any like good framework to do like generative architecture in a virtual platform at the moment, or what was your thought on that?
That's an awesome question. I think right now Decentraland is a bit, I don't know, it's a bit limited, I think, in some respects with the kind of complexity that you can achieve on a plot. Typically in Decentraland, for those that don't know, you're given each parcel is 16 by 16 meters. And you only have so many polygons or kind of mesh that you can add to this plot. I really enjoy modeling and building in Mona and Arium right now. And that could probably change in like, who knows, but I think in Mona and Arium right now, you can achieve a lot of complexity. I believe you can, really code in interesting animations through Unity and different kind of interactive elements. You can also do that in Somnium space they have Somnium worlds. Unfortunately, I think worlds are pretty expensive to buy. You kind of buy a size of the world, so it can be like 200 megabytes or 75 megabytes, which you can build a lot in through Unity. But I think with Mona and Arium, you can really code a lot of stuff into it. I haven't gone the generative art route through that, but from what I've seen, you can achieve a lot of kind of complex animations through something like Mona, because you're really just using Unity, and there's a lot of stuff you can do there.
Oh, nice. If you could share the links on the chat as well, so we can take a look at it later.
Definitely. And we'll visit a lot of these worlds too in a couple weeks, where I'll make sure we get like a sampling of each one, and that will give you guys a sense of what can be done in each world as well, hopefully. But yeah, definitely send it. Yeah.
Okay, nice. Yeah, because I remember when I tested the SDK of Decentraland, as you were saying, it was very limited. But what I like is that it was just JavaScript, so you can just create logic to do a lot of stuff with like simple shapes. But yeah, if you have like Unity, for example, that I guess it's gonna give you much more chances to do cool stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And what is cool with Decentraland and the SDK, I mean, you can do a ton with code alone. And yeah, I think like as time goes on, I hope it just gets more agile or more flexible with what we can do. And I really hope too that like there's more creativity with like more blockchain native stuff that you could do. Like I was talking with some Somnium people about, you know, if the blockchain itself, if Ethereum goes down, there should be something in the world that changes and maybe impacts the architecture that you have on site. Like for example, if gas fees are really high, maybe your architecture starts to fall apart in a generative way, or something like that. Like I wish that there were more kind of creative filters that we could use to inform the buildings that we create or the installations we have. But I hope we get to that point. I think that will eventually kind of happen. But right now, I think we're still early days with how all this looks. It's still very kind of proof of concept in some ways.
Yeah, I think so too. Cool. Great. Yeah, thanks a lot for your answers.
Yeah, no, of course. Excellent questions. Does anyone else have a thought or just kind of a general idea that they're thinking about when it comes to all this? Or if they think the metaverse is just completely bogus, that's fine too. I think it's bogus sometimes.
Well, I actually have some friends who are start with like, let's say, serious business, building stuff in the metaverse, but there are like some other platforms that are not that, let's say, they are blockchain agnostic, right? Like for example, Meta, or I don't know, the other day they told me about a couple of other ones. And I guess it's because like people found it a bit difficult to still to, buy crypto and all that kind of stuff. So, in parallel, I think it's similar to what Patricia asked before, right? There's like this kind of other path of metaverse that is blockchain agnostic, right?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of. I think architecture firms will probably eventually have like a virtual architecture studio and a physical one, and they might focus more on kind of corporate jobs that might be building for Meta, for Facebook. Yeah, I don't know. I think I think all of it is kind of. I think it's important for us all to explore it. I don't know if I hope this doesn't lead to a kind of like I love the outdoors. I love experiencing in real life architecture. It's funny because I hope a lot of my architecture friends say that, I'm supporting this kind of like dystopia of everyone plugging in to goggles and just living their life indoors. And I hope it doesn't become that. I think it's just like, yeah. I hope it becomes a new kind of public space for people who can't get to, a public square in New York to do a protest. They can hop into a VR set and participate in one virtually. But yeah, I think like crypto is still very much a big barrier for people getting into this. And I think for a lot of people, it's just very misunderstood, or it's very hard to get into understandably. But yeah, I hope those barriers break down a bit and the knowledge kind of spreads. But certainly it's still early. Um, yeah, if I start working for Facebook, I think you guys need to call me out on that. Like I heard you in 2022 saying you would never do that, so you have to hold me to it.
Yeah, we're gonna check you out. No worries.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with exploring new things. It's just there's going to be two different types of metaverses in my mind.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for coming on. I hope you can hear me well. My internet connection is a bit patchy today. Um, uh, I actually recently read Snow Crash because it came up so much, and something that I find quite interesting when reading the book is like how I would say 80% of the book is actually outside of the metaverse, and only 20% of the book is in the metaverse, and it's only a few characters that actually visit the metaverse. So it's interesting to also think of it like, yeah, it will be a place, but it's not necessarily going to be where 100% of the population is going to spend 24 hours per day of their time. But anyways, that's just a thought. I have a question related to your design process. I wonder, like, how do you work with scale inside as a metaverse architect, and also because, like, so far the spaces that I've entered, I I don't know if I can like fully position myself in front of the art piece, or I just like figure out how to maneuver myself in the space, and then I always wonder, like, well, wouldn't I have experienced this art better if it was just on a static website in a way? So yeah, I wonder, like, how do you work with that, the user experience, and what can be improved, or what are your kind of hacks around that?
Yeah, that's thank you so much for your comments and question. I think yeah, to start, it is funny that everyone. I also feel like with Snow Crash, there are a lot of like dystopic elements to it where I'm like, oh no, I hope we don't go that direction. It's funny to hear the metaverse being like used in this way. Um, but yeah, yeah, back to your question. I think scale is a really fascinating part of this, where, and we'll discuss that a bit in the tour that we take, because there's this project Anubis mentioned called Forms, where I've been making these modular kind of building elements that can be scaled to different sizes, and we're playing with this with rooms as well, where you can have. I think you can. There should be more play right now between different building elements and how you can experience a space, and how that can ultimately like enhance the art that's on display. Um, so I think for me, I really like it when you can take a staircase and scale it to the size of a pyramid, or scale it down to the size of a tiny staircase. I think that's like an important part of the metaverse, where what you build can be scaleless and serve different functions depending on what size it is. So I think there should be more play with that, and I hope we do some of that with rooms, this project I'm working on now. But yeah, for art, I think it's interesting because there's really like uh, we're still, a lot of the art that's being created right now is still a square. And I think the NFT medium will push past that as time goes on. But we're still looking at square art, and art is still obsessed with squares. And I think the metaverse is a different kind of, art should be beyond the square. Because I still think you're still dealing with like, planes. You're building for planes and building these kind of like environments that support planed experiences. And sometimes it makes the art look good, and sometimes it makes it very hard, as you're saying, to kind of experience the art when compared to a web page. To me, the square art is very website native. Like, you're used to scrolling, seeing it flat, seeing it kind of on a plane that is perpendicular to your eyes. And the metaverse is not quite that. And so I hope that the art that people begin to create through NFTs pushes a little bit past that boundary. But yeah, I think some some artwork, for me and what we do at the museum, we do look at like how artworks can be experienced in a different way. And like with Hackatow, for example, the bear head, that was one art piece, but it was a 3D art piece, and it could be experienced in this kind of full environment. I think we'll see more of that type of work down the line, but certainly square art has its challenges, and I think it's an interesting thing right now that we're still very addicted to that kind of shape. I don't know if that answers the question or if it just makes more problems. But I think it's like an interesting back and forth right now where we're still very much using Web 2 kind of format in a Web 3 environment. And I do hope that changes.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting proposition that you make, and that perhaps also being more in this 3D space will push art outside of the screen and even hopefully outside of the square format that we're always pushed into by the big Web 2 players.
Yeah, I think it will only improve as kind of the tools improve. But it is funny. I think there should really. I mean, some NFTs are certainly you can create a lot within an NFT. It can be very abstract. It could be the metadata itself, and I think even some of the on-chain art, how that's formatted on a 2D page, it would be interesting if there's a metaverse format for these kind of like on-chain NFTs too, so that like different colors can be expressed spatially. I think that would be more interesting. But yeah, it's still it's a really good question. It's a really good kind of topic, and I hope you guys push that boundary too. Through the residency, I think there's a lot of chance to kind of like stretch everything that we know a little bit further and figure out what the next kind of phase of crypto art will look like.
Hello, Kirk. Thank you very much for putting your time, sharing your thoughts about the metaverse. It was a great presentation. Thank you. I just have some questions about the tools. I'm a 3D artist. I use Cinema 4D for a lot of things, motion graphics and polygon modeling as well. But I use it just for motion design, and for polygon modeling specifically, where you actually do this for your environment. I currently started a bit on Blender, and but I'm just the beginning, not really that much, but which is way more powerful in polygon modeling than Cinema 4D. I just wanted to give you a background about the tools I currently. I also use ZBrush, but that's rarely used, in building environments. But I just wanted to know the tools that you normally use in your workflow, and the tools that you use to export those environments or those geometries that you create for the metaverse. I would really appreciate if you talk about that a bit. Thank you.
Of course, that's a great question. And yes, so I typically use a 3D modeling software called Rhinoceros. That's still for me like been such a precise modeling software. That's like a traditional architecture software too. So I'm still stuck with that. And that's just a modeling software I know best. But more recently, I've done a lot in Blender, and Blender does offer like some pretty incredible modeling, really powerful modeling tools and rendering ability. I render most of my work through Blender, even if it's modeled in Rhinoceros. So I'll bring it to Blender to kind of apply different materials. So for the artwork itself, it's primarily that flow of like modeling everything in Rhinoceros, maybe some things in Blender to kind of adjust it, and then rendering it through Blender. But Blender is also a really good, for those who don't know, it's an open source 3D software that's really, really powerful. And because it's open source, it's just, improving all the time. and it's got a really good community around it with tutorials and things like that. But it also plugs in very well with a lot of the metaverse kind of worlds because they all kind of have a tutorial that starts with Blender. That's pretty standard. So for me, I'm still very much a beginner with Blender as well. I'm still learning how to model things properly, and best practices are a little tricky sometimes when you're learning virtually instead of in school. So, for me, I've been trying to learn that better. And then a lot of virtual worlds use Unity as well. So sometimes I'll take a model from Blender, import it into Unity, and then Unity might have an SDK or something that packages the file into something like Mona or Somnium space or one of these worlds. And so that's kind of the flow so far. But it is a ton of like software hopping, which is kind of like exhausting. It is really like too many tutorials out there. So I do wish we had like a metaverse standard for modeling where, you can create one shape and pass it through different things, which is kind of what we're exploring with rooms, where you can create one building and it can exist across worlds. So we're trying new strategies for that. But certainly right now, every world has its own style, its own file type, and it's very, very tricky.
Yeah, thank you very much for your explanation. I really appreciate it. I also, I was thinking about, yeah, actually the crypto voxel and all these environment, different lands that people get to, build and make geometries and environments. I just want to know that how, I mean, yeah, this, the output that we use in these platforms should be limited right now. I mean, what do you think will be happening? How much time will it take until we have a more immersive and kind of a more realistic environments within the metaverse? Where how much time do you think we need to build? And what do you predict about this? That when and where that we have this kind of a immersive environment that is really we can interact with, and and it is very far advanced than these limited environments that we currently have. What do you think about this? I would really appreciate your thoughts about it.
Yeah, of course, CG Cortex. That's great. That's a really good point. It's really right now. I think that's one of the limitations of the blockchain metaverse, so to speak, is that a lot of people say, like it looks too basic. They're used to these high quality gaming experiences like Fortnite, playing in Minecraft and Roblox even, and having this kind of like beautiful user experience that's very catered and very like has such a good flow to it. And of course, the quality of the gaming world is so strong. I think we might be, to create a game, it can take 5 to 10 years in some cases. Like to create a really immersive, indie studio kind of game, it can take a few years. So I think we are maybe a few years out from a brilliantly flawless kind of experience that's super immersive and utilizes blockchain infrastructure for either the assets that are part of the game or part of the world, or some sort of like token economy that will be part of it. But to me, blockchain just makes so much sense for gaming. Gaming, it just takes a really long time to create. And I actually previously, when I left my architecture firm and I was trying to figure out different things within the crypto world, I actually worked for a little bit for a gaming company called Neon District. And those guys, they're actually part of that team went on to work on Cyber Brokers, if you guys know that collection. And Ben, who's the CTO there, and Coin Artist, and that whole team, they've been building this really incredible world and it takes a tremendous amount of time to really build up a game and make the mechanics of it work, make it sustainable. Typically, when you're working with a token economy and NFTs, it just adds so much complexity because you need to make it, you need to think about the economy of it all. Where, Fortnite, they need to think about their economy in terms of the bucks, the kind of currency you use to buy skins, which is a little bit of a one-sided economy. It works for them as a company, but when you're doing a blockchain-based world like this, you need to think of the community as well as the kind of core game builders themselves. So I think we are a few years away from a kind of beautiful experience that's really high resolution, high fidelity, really immersive. Um, but I certainly think the money is there to support this growth. Like the tremendous amount of money that teams like Yuga Labs have earned and continuing to earn from this to build out their own worlds. It's just unprecedented. And so out of all of this, I think we're in a cycle now where in the next cycle we'll see the products being launched. Um, and so we're no doubt going to get there, but it'll take some time because it just naturally takes a lot to put together a project like that. It's a lot different than me putting together a museum kind of build or putting together an art piece. It's a lot of moving parts.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it would be so exciting to see that these, environments become realistic over time. And I'm just curious, how in the future we can just, build new technologies to actually make this possible. It's really exciting. Thank you very much for your explanation.
Yeah, of course. No, I think that's the key is the more we can decentralize from that, the faster we'll move. So the more open frameworks that these metaverse worlds, these worlds create for the community to continue to build and improve, I think the better. So, I think right now, honestly, I wish like worlds like Decentraland were a little bit more open with how they develop their world and their code and everything so that people can contribute to make it better, to improve the asset library, to have a public library of different things that you can import into builds, or have a kind of different way of kind of coding or hacking a plot to do whatever you want. Like I feel like the world that can hack that and make a framework that is more accessible and you can improvise on, that's the one that's going to really, really move fast because people are going to love and have fun to create different things there. We still haven't really seen that yet. It's still pretty kind of like low poly out there. But yeah, we'll no doubt. I mean, blockchain and gaming just makes too much sense, and I think it's too compelling, and we'll see some pretty cool stuff that happens from there.
That's awesome. Thank you very much.
Anyone have last couple questions? If not, I really appreciate you guys letting me drone on. I know I can kind of babble on about metaverse stuff, and I know it's all very kind of like nebulous right now. So I really appreciate you guys sticking around to hear me talk about this and give me a chance to speak to it. Had amazing questions. So yeah, I guess Matilda, if
Yeah,
we're at
I
the end,
think
let me know.
yeah, absolutely. Actually, if you want, guys, you can prepare some other question for next class that we have. So you can do your own works actually. So thank you so much again, Kirk, for everything. I love this your presentation first, and then the way you explain the metaverse. I think it's the first time that I heard something like so community based. I don't know how to explain it, but I really love your point of view on the metaverse, and I can't wait to see the second part of this class. So thank you so much for your time. And for everyone else, enjoy your day and thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And yeah, I'll see you for the next class, and we'll do some touring. It'll be a good field trip.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Have a good one. Bye bye.
Thank you, Kirk. Thanks.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Kurt. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.